And joining me now from Cleveland is Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who announced this week, to the surprise of many, that he had decided not to run for president in 2020. Senator Brown, welcome back to Meet the Press. Senator,
good to be back. Thanks.
Color us very surprised. In fact, the last time you were on, my executive producer noted he was speaking about his presidential campaign in the present tense. It seemed so imminent to us. So you did surprise a lot of people. You had even begun to hire some people. What changed your mind?
Well, as you know, Chuck, this all started off because I don't think Democrats were talking to working class Americans of all races enough. If you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work. We began our Dignity of Work tour in 4 states. Yes, we hired people to help us with that tour and to be ready. That our goal was to inform the narrative in the Democratic Party so that Democrats began to talk more to workers and talked about the dignity of work. A number of candidates have already done that, have been talking about the dignity of work. I predict that the Democratic nominee is the one that talks to workers the best. And I'm not just talking about workers in the industrial Midwest. I'm talking about the physical therapist in Nevada and the construction worker in New Hampshire and the hospital worker in Baltimore. And I would predict, if I could do this, that come January 20th, 2021, that in the inaugural, when the Democratic president-elect raises her or his right hand, they will launch into a speech. Their inaugural speech will talk about the dignity of work, because it's not just a slogan. It's who I am. It's what we fight for. Well, but most importantly, it's how we govern.
Actually, to reinforce what you're saying, we put together a collection of folks that stole your line. Take a listen.
We have to reward and recognize the dignity of work, right?
There is dignity in all work and career professionals.
We've got to give it the dignity of the work that is being performed.
So, Senator, your message, in some ways, you're doing something that many presidential candidates wish could have happened to them. Your initial message begins to resonate to the point where you've got competitors stealing your lines. So let me ask you this. How do you not run? It was resonating, and you still said no.
Well, it's resonating, and I'd say mission accomplished, but I'm not done yet. I can do that better now from the Senate. I mean, we spent 3 months talking about the dignity of work. I'll continue to do that. I went to the floor right after I announced I wasn't going to run and talked about civil rights and voting rights and worker rights and a Supreme Court that puts its thumb on the scales of justice in favoring corporations over workers and health insurance company over sick people and Wall Street over consumers. I will continue that economic populist fight, always through the eyes of workers. It's what we are as a party. I think I can drive that better from the Senate than I can as one out of 15, 20 presidential candidates. But in that sense,
I'm curious. When was the last time you talked to Joe Biden?
October.
So you haven't talked to him recently. This wasn't him calling around letting people know he's running?
It was none of that. I know that that's been reported, but the people that reported that never called me, never called Connie, never called Sarah Benzing, my chief of staff, never called Jenny, my communications director. I like Joe Biden. I just haven't talked to him. And people ask me in almost every one of these states, is Joe Biden getting in, having any impact on your decision? And my answer was always zero.
So when people were assessing your candidacy, you were seen as one of these folks that could bridge this divide. You're a guy that figured out how to win in a red state, but also had kept to some progressive principles. In fact, here's what you told the nation in an interview very recently, just before you decided not to run. You said, if I run, I'll be the only Democrat on the stage who will have voted against the Iraq War, who will have voted against the Defense of Marriage Act, which means and for marriage equality, and who will be pro-choice 100% over the years. What was interesting there, it seemed to me it was your way of saying, hey, I'm an experienced Democrat, but I'm also on the progressive side of the lane in ways that other Democrats, perhaps you're referring to Joe Biden, were not.
I was referring to nobody in particular. I was just saying that I've been a strong progressive for years. I will carry that back to the Senate. I will be part of this presidential campaign in terms of calling out this president for his phony populism. Populism is never racist and anti-Semitic. Populism doesn't divide people. Populists don't give tax cuts to the richest people in the country and then try to cut Medicare and Head Start. And I will point out how this president has betrayed the auto workers in Lordstown and betrayed hospital workers in Van Wert. And I will continue to make that case from the floor of the Senate, from travels around the country, by not yet supporting any presidential candidate, but moving the debate forward about dignity of work.
But let me ask you this. Do you think there's a danger of going too far to the left, that it might scare some voters, say, in Ohio?
Well, I hear these stories that's the story of the day about Democrats moving to the left. I think the more important story is how Republicans continue to move to the right, how President Trump extols, betrays workers and utters racist, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and nobody in their party calls them out. They don't have divisions. They've all followed his racist actions and betrayal of workers. They followed it like lemmings off the cliff. That's the story, not of some degrees of differences between and among Democrats. That's the real story.
Let me ask you this, though. What is fair game? You in that interview had said, hey, in 1996, when it wasn't a popular thing to do, you voted against the Defense of Marriage Act, for instance. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden has comments about busing and desegregation of schools that are popping up, some quotes from him in the 70s. You could make an argument that was the mainstream Democratic Party position, perhaps, in the 70s. Should those comments matter to voters in Iowa, to Democrats in Iowa in the 21st century?
Well, it doesn't really matter what Chuck Todd or Sherrod Brown thinks about whether they matter to voters in Iowa.
Do they matter to you?
It matters. Records matter to me. The candidate that is talking. I mean, I go back to what are they going to do about talking to workers and the dignity of work. I want to see dignity of work not just part of this campaign, not just a slogan, not just what these candidates talk about. I want to make sure they govern based on the dignity of work, and so regardless of the kind of work you do, whether it's about wages, it's about benefits, it's about workplace safety, it's about child care. In the Nevada, in the Culinary Workers Union Hall in Las Vegas, Connie and I were there 3 or 4 weeks ago. Their slogan is one job should be enough. I want to hear workers start talking about that one living wage job should be enough, with health care, with retirement, with child care, with safety in the workplace. That's everything to me in this race. And that's a winning message, and it's the way we should govern starting in 2021.
Senator, I'm going to close with the same question I asked you at the beginning. I still didn't really hear an answer for why you didn't run. Is it simply you didn't want to do it?
I think we were successful in moving forward as we have. I was talking to some people about this, and you can run 3 different ways. You can run as Eeyore, where you get up every day and, oh my God, I got to do this, and I didn't want to be that. You can run as the angry candidate. I didn't want to be that. Or you can run as the sort of optimist, joyful candidate, the way I try to do my job in the Senate. I think I can do that better in the Senate in continuing to inform this presidential race.
Senator, you're saying you can't run for president joyfully. That's what I just heard. Sorry.
I think I can do it better in the Senate.
Fair enough.
Leave it at that, Chuck.
Senator Sherrod Brown.
You're short. It's always joyful being on your show.
Well, that I appreciate. It's Sunday morning, cup of coffee, and you've sprung forward. I appreciate.
Even when the time changes and you make me get up an hour earlier.
Senator, I will
And then
leave
you
it there.
broadcast it later, and people don't know how early we got up. So on Sunday. Anyway, thank you,
You
Chuck.
and your Ohio colleague, John Kasich, man, you guys know how to talk to your Ohio voters. Thank you, sir. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.